beside the seaside. I do like to be beside the sea. I do like to swim along the pond. The brass band plays tiddly-um-pom-pom. Just let me be beside the seaside. I'll be beside myself with glee. And there's lots of girls beside I would like to be beside. Beside the seaside, beside the sea.
I was born in Southport in 1959. The family was quite a big family. My dad was one of 8. All born in Southport, all mostly. My dad was the only one that left Southport to go travelling. The rest were all still living in Southport with their families.
There was always at Christmas or in other times, family occasions, big get-togethers. And I was brought up with that sort of consciousness. What would the family think? You know, if you stepped out of line, it wasn't just you getting into trouble, it was the name of the family that was important. And I think that was typical of other families. I don't think it was just us.
Or getting the bus when we were kids, you could get on the bus when you were a kid, you know, and you'd go swimming and you'd come back and there were these massive old vending machines, big clunky things, and you'd get chicken soup and a bag of cheese and these crisps, you know, and it was like that was, it was kind of evocative. It was like a smell of the buses and the soup and your friends all laughing and that, and those kinds of things, sort of, you know, those are the things you remember.
You just walked along to the end and back again. There was an ice cream thing at the other end where you could buy an ice cream cornet, but really there wasn't a lot there, you know.
Oh, the bathing lake, yes. Certainly as a tourist attraction, I think it was superb. Yes, my mum would take us as boys, and we'd just take a picnic and spend all day there, in and out of the water. Again, there was a great sense of freedom.
The sense of family there, you know, you go in there and you take the same spot each weekend, you know. I have massive fond memories of it. What a great place. I mean, the one that sticks in my mind is the summer of '76, I think it was. It was this blistering hot summer. Plagues of ladybirds that were flying around, I mean millions of them, and you were swimming in the water with big sort of patches of ladybirds.
Sea Bathing Lake, I remember as a teenager, big crowds of us used to take off during the summer holidays, and we would just go in the morning, and it wasn't very much to get in, and you would spend the whole day in the Sea Bathing Lake, and we would swim, we would sunbathe. It was just such a nice time. You know, people had radios, so you'd sit and listen to your music, and just spend all day at the Sea Bathing Lake. The shops were most definitely posh shops, you know, the fur shops, the jewellery shops, the outfitters, men's outfitters, women's outfitters. People would wander along window shopping, and it was a real thing to do. People used to come to Southport specifically to walk up and down Lord Street because there were the canopies, the glass canopies over the top, so it was very pleasant to walk along. Because is it a mile, Lord Street? I think it must be a mile long, and you could walk right along undercover looking in these very exclusive shops and stop off and have a very posh brew if you wanted to.
Lord Street was so filled with all these very expensive shops that we used to go and look at the windows and look through, you know, and think how nice it was. And then I think that all those shops that they've built sort of where the swimming pool used to be around there, I think that's a shame. But I suppose it's good for business, for people coming to Southport, and they have the big car parks, and you know, people will come if they only come in for a day. I don't know. But Lord Street is certainly different.
Those has changed hugely. In some areas for the better, and in others not. I love the facades of the buildings on Law Street. I love the history about Law Street, and I think it's something that we could have capitalised on. But I think there's been a lot of concessions to big business and to, well, I don't want to say payoffs or whatever, but it seems like the fabric of Lord Street has been eroded. I know things have to move on, but I just feel that it's becoming samey, where all the things that used to bring people to Southport, that sort of elegance that used to be here and that sort of cosmopolitan thing that it used to have, feel that it used to have, doesn't seem to be there as much these days.
It's sad to see because it's scruffy now. Somebody online said that they'd let the canopies go, because they used to be maintained and there used to be big flower baskets outside, that people used to water from the shops and all that. But all that's gone. So now you walk down and the canopies are big holes in them, and cracked glass or just gone altogether. And there's even a Wetherspoons on Lord Street, which is sort of a marker, isn't it? If Wetherspoons is a sort of barometer for the social changes, then from high-class tailors and furriers to Wetherspoons, that's what's happened.
Well, Lord Street had a lot of family businesses. There are very, very few of them left now, I think.
Really, with cars, you couldn't possibly have done the way that we went. That I think they built that road because of the amount of traffic that was building up over the years. It's good for Southport. There's lots of more people are able to go because they've got a car. You see, the Marine Lake was only one long thing where you could go, start at one end and walk along a little wall and get off at the other end. But it isn't like that now, is it?
And it was simple pleasures. And so, yeah, the sea bathing lake going was very, very sad. A big loss to the town, especially now the sea doesn't come in.
It was a great attraction. Whether health and safety had something to do with it, I don't know. It was, as far as I know, it was seawater that was filtered in. And I think it must have been for economic reasons that they closed it down, but it was a great pity.
I mean, the big death knell for me was the Pleasure Beach. I remember reading the paper, and it said that they've looked at the finances of it and couldn't continue to do both this Pleasure Beach and Blackpool, and so they moved some of the stuff to Blackpool, and they left it to go derelict, and there'd been arson attacks and such. And a few pages back was a thing about wanting to find a site for a massive conference centre. I don't take the brains of an archbishop to work that one out. In the 70s you had the rise of the package holiday, didn't you? So to some degree, it's even today, it's cheaper to go away than it is to stay in the UK. When you can get on a plane and go to where the sun is guaranteed for less than you can have the same holiday here, then I think that's an issue for people because money's tight for everybody. Everybody's skint.
I think they get far more day trippers than what they used to have. People went for a week's holiday. Now I think a lot of people go to Southport for the day. But I think they think it's too near. People want to go abroad, don't they? They wouldn't go to Southport now, most people. Unless, even my generation, a lot of people still go abroad. Went to Torquay when our children were small as well. We went to Torquay, which was a long way then, and we didn't have a car. We went on a coach and travelled overnight. But I mean, that was a big distance to go to Torquay.
We used to get people coming actually on holidays and staying in the B&Bs and in the hotels. And I think that's changed over the years because nationally, again, we tend to go abroad because we want the weather, don't we? So people don't come to sunny Southport as it used to be known because it ain't sunny anymore.
There's a terrific rise in tourism in the 19th century. It had existed before then. People went on, the wealthier people went on what was called the Grand Tour, for instance. They would go to the Lake District or maybe into Europe. But by the time you got into the 19th century, people of the middle classes were now starting to sort of go to the seaside. They were following the example of the royals normally. And soon the working classes were doing exactly the same thing, because the opportunities were being put in place for them to get to the seaside, the rise of the train and that kind of thing. The middle classes were really quite worried about the sorts of things that the working classes might get up to once they started to muscle in on the places that they, the middle classes, were used to going to. So Southport and Blackpool and so on would initially have been the sorts of places where you'd have middle class people going for what would be a nice sort of rational holiday. And they were really worried that with the rise of the excursion train that you would have ordinary people going there, and who knows how they might behave when they'd get there. It was really worried that they'd run riot or be just generally badly behaved. And so there was an attempt to impose a sort of a rational recreation on the working classes. By the end of the century, it had sorted itself out in that you had kind of no-go zones for middle-class people. If you wanted to pursue, say, rational recreations in museums and libraries and parks and so on, you knew where they were. If you wanted to go and sort of have a really good time, which is what most of the working-class people did, then, again, you knew exactly where you needed to go.
You always felt, in some respects, that although you were a working-class person from this area, that you were a little bit more higher up than the working class person from another area. But there were always those people who were ridiculously rich looking down on you. It is an upmarket destination, or once was. Southport, if you wanted to be a slightly posh end of things, you had the Blackpool if you wanted the tacky end of things. And I don't mean that to be rude to Blackpool, because I love the place. But that's the way it was seen. The experience of Southport was always you felt, although you were working class, you were a little bit posher end of working class. I thought that's where I felt anyway.
There was an awareness of class difference, but I don't think it surfaced an awful lot. It was just there in the background, I think.
We were only very poor, and we stayed in a boarding house on Bank Square, and we could see this place, but the outside pool, and you could see people going in, but of course we couldn't go in. But you could, if you stood up sort of on a slope, you could look over the top into what was going on, or you could go and peep through the boards round, and we could see what was happening. We knew it was a swimming pool, but I mean we never went in it.
I felt very sort of working class in comparison to the customers, and knew very much knew my place as the sort of the junior of the shop in the sales staff, and there was a pecking order even in the sales staff. There was one particular lady who came from, she lived in Crossons, and she had her hair swept back, and she was always very smart, and when she was serving the ladies, when she spoke to us, she spoke with just an ordinary Southport accent, and then as soon as there was somebody posh to serve, oh yes madam, that looks beautiful madam.
The legend was, when I was growing up, there were two parts of Birkdale. On the seaward side of the railway line, it was Barkdale, whereas on the inland side of the railway, it was Birkdale.
You had coach excursions, horse and coach excursions, that would take middle-class people there. And I'm sure they had a lovely time, but it was the sheer cost of doing that and the length of time that it took to go there, which meant that working class people didn't go. But the working classes, they did like to emulate what their social betters were doing. They'd want to see what it was all about. And because of the change in nature of the time that people had, the disposable that people had, it was kind of like a natural thing that they would want to go away to somewhere which was fairly nearby, but which meant that they got out of the smoky, smelly town that they were used to most of the time. And of course, once the royals were doing this sort of thing, and Victoria, for instance, she liked going to the Isle of Wight and paddling in the sea off the Isle of Wight. And so that encouraged the middle classes to do exactly the same thing. And then that encouraged the working classes to follow on as well.
We have Lord Street, which was a very smart street at one time and quite representative of a certain class of people, I suppose, you know, sort of upper middle classes. And so putting a big monument in there ties in with that sort of whole ethos of Lord Street being a very well-to-do place with its shopping arcades and its covered you know, canopies all the way along, and so as opposed to put the monument in there, it's a representation of the pride of the town, I suppose, as well as what they aspire to.
The Victorians liked their heroes. They would memorialise these people, often by a statue was a fairly new innovation. It was the heroic, it was the royalty, it was the people who went out and were seen to be doing things, who became associated with the spread of the British Empire in the 19th century. They were the people who the Victorians were really keen to memorialise. I'm not sure how, just how people absorbed these values and thought of themselves as sort of part of this empire and subscribed to those values that they associated with it. Things like, you know, the heroic exploring spirit, you know, the masculine explorer, the writer who talked about, you know, the superiority of the whites and so on. I think these were the sorts of values that we now associate with the British Empire, but that's largely because they're written by middle-class people, and they are the only things, or they're most of the things written and created at the time, which is what feeds into now and how we understand the Victorians. It's the middle classes who wrote the history, and therefore, so often, those are the only histories that we look at.
I enjoy the history of Southport, where we can trace it back to its roots. You know, I think it could have gone down a different track, where we could have kept that. I'm not saying we should be insular and isolated. People should come here, and we should invite them to come here. But the reason they came here was because of that one sense of Victorian grandeur and elegance. I think it's ingrained in Southport people from here. I think that legacy is something that Southport was built on, and the changes I suppose I'm seeing are sort of glossing that out, or rubbing that out of the history of Southport, and I think that's what's going wrong.
People tended to look back and think, oh well, that was the golden age, Victorian values, everything was right and wrong, and you knew the difference. That was a good aspect of it. You knew where the boundaries were. And for children growing up, you knew if you went across the boundaries, you got a clip round the ear. Not just from the teacher or from the policeman, but from your dad when he got home. That's changed. Yeah. There are aspects which are better, and there are other aspects which I would like to feel we could restore some of the stricter values. So I'm in between.
As a society, you know, I like I said before, I try and be optimistic, but having that sort of class gave people something to aspire to, whereas now I don't think people have those same aspirations in that way. I walked along the pier a couple of months ago and the sea was in. It can't have been, perhaps it was back end of last year, because there was just a bit of sunshine and the sea was in and people were actually paddling, and it's like, oh wow, I've not seen that for so long. We don't get the weather like we used to. I can remember, you know, beautiful sunny days, and all the summer holidays seem to be sunny. Climate change has made a big difference. We seem to have more sunny days.
That's perception again, isn't it? You look back and you remember the sunny days. I really don't know what the future is. I don't think there's a lot going for younger generations in the town as it is now. So in terms of the business community, not that I'm close to that really, there must be question marks there.
You know, we had such lovely holidays when we were children there, and it's still, I suppose it's still in my mind. To me, Southport is still Southport as it was, although I know it isn't. There are still good things at Southport, like now they've got the little train on the pier, you know, and there's still the nice parks, and there's always beautiful flowers and on the promenade, and that, you know, they spend a lot of time and a lot of money, you know. Those are the things that have changed. But to me, in spite of all that, Southport is still Southport to me. Because it isn't just memories, it's that, I mean, to me it feels part of me because I've been going for so long. I mean, I'm nearly 90 now, aren't I? And say I've been going there since I was about 3, 4, 5-year-old. You know, and even like with our children, we still went. And since I've been on my own, I've still been. You know, I still like it.
I feel anxious for the future of Southport in its guise, or in its present guise. I think it's just going to turn into Blackpool. A lot of the times when you go to Blackpool, there are these beautiful buildings with this hideous monstrosity of a neon sign nailed onto the front of it, you know, and I don't want that to happen here. I think it's because I'm from here, I just absolutely love the place. It has so much that we could really capitalise and build on if it was done sensibly and sympathetically. Southport's got a future if we recognise it.
Yes, I do like to be beside the seaside.